It's the dead of night in the Solomon Islands. Aboard the light cruiser Helena, radar operators lean in as faint contacts begin to flicker onto the screen. Moments later, confirmation comes through. Japanese ships are closing in. General quarters is sounded. Gun crews scramble to their positions. The Americans are ready. Just hours earlier, Rear Admiral Ainsworth's Task Force 3 cruisers and 4 destroyers slipped into Kula Gulf under cover of darkness. Their mission? Intercept a Japanese reinforcement run aimed at supplying the garrison at Kolombangara. North of the Gulf, Japanese destroyers are returning from Vila, their holds empty after offloading over 2,600 troops. Their flagship, Nizuki, leads the column, unaware that American cruisers are already tracking their movements. The Gulf is narrow, visibility poor. Radar-directed guns are loaded, torpedoes are armed. Both formations know battle is approaching. Neither knows exactly what awaits, but in moments, the sea between New Georgia and Kolombangara will erupt with fire. The Battle of Kula Gulf is about to begin. The American victory at Blackett Strait on March 6, 1943, was not just a tactical success, it was a signal. For the first time in the Solomons, a US destroyer squadron had used radar to detect, intercept, and destroy enemy warships without taking a single hit in return. The operation proved that with coordination and effective use of new technology, the US Navy could contest, if not control, the night. But the Japanese response was not retreat, it was adaptation. In the aftermath of Blackett, the Imperial Japanese Navy redoubled efforts to reinforce its bases in the Central Solomons, particularly the garrisons at Munda and Vila. The Tokyo Express Night destroyer transport missions was accelerated. Though the loss of Murasame and Minagumo had demonstrated growing American capability, the stakes at Munda demanded continued risk. Kolombangara, directly across the Blackett Strait, became the key logistical hub. From there, supplies could reach the embattled airfield via barge and jungle track. The entire defense of New Georgia now rested on the success of these reinforcement runs. Meanwhile, the Americans prepared for the next phase of their advance, Operation Toenails. Planners in Noumea and Pearl Harbor sought to take Munda, Rendova, and eventually neutralize Vila. But they knew that without cutting the Japanese supply chain, any advance would be met with fresh resistance. The decision was made to intercept enemy convoys as far north as feasible, ideally within Kula Gulf itself. Throughout April and May, the Solomon Sea grew more volatile. American PT boats began aggressive patrols up the slot. Land-based aircraft harassed enemy barges by day. At night, destroyers probed deeper, but still, the Japanese moved men. The night remained theirs, unevenly contested, but not lost for. It wasn't until late June that the tempo escalated. On June 30th, Allied forces landed at Rendova and launched a push inland toward Munda. Japanese resistance was intense, well-organized, and critically being reinforced. From bases at Rabaul and Bowen, destroyer transports surged south through the slot toward Vila. The reinforcement runs grew bolder, heavier, and more desperate. In response, Task Group 36.1 was activated under Rear Admiral Walden L. Ainsworth. His assignment? Interdict Japanese reinforcement traffic heading into Kula Gulf. Ainsworth, a cruiser officer by background, was cautious but experienced. His force consisted of 3 Brooklyn-class light cruisers, Helena, Honolulu, and St. Louis, each armed with 15 6-inch guns. Supporting them were 4 destroyers, Nicholas, Radford, Jenkins, and O'Bannon, all veterans of earlier actions. The Japanese, aware of increased American pressure, planned a major troop delivery run to Kolombangara for the night of July 5th. Rear Admiral Teruo Akiyama was given command of a 10-destroyer force carrying over 2,600 men of the 13th Infantry Regiment. His flagship, Nizuki, was among the few Japanese destroyers equipped with surface search radar. The rest of the formation included Suzukaze and Tanikaze in the escort group, Nagatsuki, Satsuki, Amagiri, and Hatsuyuki in the second transport group, and Mochizuki, Mikazuki, and Hamikaze from the first transport group, which had already begun unloading at Vila. Not all of these ships would participate directly in the engagement, as several were in the process of withdrawing when contact was made. On the evening of July 5th, Ainsworth's force departed Tulagi and moved northwest up the slot, hugging the eastern approaches to New Georgia. The cruisers led, destroyers in trail. Radar was fully manned, gun crews were at readiness, and torpedo tubes were trained outboard. Though the Americans were expected, the precise timing and location of the intercept remained unknown. Niizuki's radar gave Akiyama some advantage, but not enough to level the field. His primary concern was reaching Vila before dawn, offloading and retreating without entanglement. That was no longer likely. As July 6th began, the two columns converged silently, one southbound, one northbound, closing within 10 nautical miles, 18.5 kilometers, of each other. 1:57 a.m. The American formation, 3 cruisers and 4 destroyers, had entered Kula Gulf in a line-ahead formation. Honolulu, Helena, and St. Louis formed the center. Destroyers Nicholas and O'Bannon led the van, with Jenkins and Radford bringing up the rear. The ships were alert, radar-equipped, and ready to engage. Now, the enemy had arrived. Aboard Honolulu, radar operators confirmed multiple surface contacts approaching from the southwest. These were Rear Admiral Akiyama's covering destroyers, Niizuki, Suzukaze, and Tanikaze, closing at high speed in rough formation. Rear Admiral Ainsworth, commanding from Honolulu, gave the order to open fire. Helena fired first. Her forward 6-inch turrets unleashed a rapid sequence of salvos, guided by radar range data. She had expended her flashless powder the previous night, and now fired with smokeless charges, briefly revealing her silhouette. Within moments, St. Louis and Honolulu joined in. Over 600 shells were fired in the first 21 minutes, directed entirely at radar targets. The Americans aimed to break up any torpedo attack before it could be launched. Early hits were effective. Niizuki, Akiyama's flagship, and one of the few Japanese destroyers with radar, took several direct hits within the first salvos. She had been operating at the head of the Japanese column, slightly separated from the main transport group, and thus became the primary target of US radar-directed fire. As the first American shells arced in, she attempted to maneuver, possibly to launch torpedoes, but was already within the cruiser's optimal range. Multiple 6-inch shells from Helena and St. Louis found her almost immediately. The first burst destroyed her forward gun mount. The second struck the bridge, killing most of her senior staff in a single blast. One shell appears to have penetrated beneath the bridge structure and detonated near the torpedo reload racks. Another impacted her midsection near the base of her foremast, likely setting off electrical fires. By 2:12, the destroyer was a blazing wreck and went down with Akiyama, her captain, and most of her crew. Elsewhere, destroyers from the Japanese transport divisions, Amagiri, Hatsuyuki, Satsuki, and Nagatsuki, were already turning away under smoke, having completed their offload at Vila or maneuvering to escape. With their formation leader gone, Japanese coordination fractured. The remaining destroyers broke contact, some veering southeast, others slipping west along Kolombangara's shoreline to avoid detection. Amagiri turned sharply toward Vila under cover of smoke, while Satsuki slowed to assist Nagatsuki, which had taken a hit and run aground near Sulumuni Cove on Kolombangara's eastern coast. The impact left her stranded on the reef, immobile and exposed. In the confusion, American fire shifted erratically, chasing fleeting radar echoes among the shadows, but the main Japanese force was already slipping away. Despite the early success, the battle was far from decided. Then, lookouts aboard Helena spotted torpedo wakes slicing in from the port quarter, long white tracks arcing inward at shallow angles. These were long-lance torpedoes, launched minutes earlier by Suzukaze and Tanikaze. The Type 93 torpedo was dangerous, oxygen-propelled, nearly wakeless at night, with a range exceeding 20,000 yards. Radar could not detect them. Only visual alertness and evasive maneuvering could mitigate the threat. Helena, committed to radar-guided gunnery and now illuminated by her own gunfire, had little room to maneuver. At 2:03, 3 torpedoes struck in quick succession. The first hit abreast the number 1 turret, blowing off the bow and the turret with its crew. The second and third slammed amidships, breaking the ship's back. The sequence of explosions cracked the keel. Helena began to settle by the bow. Captain Charles P. Cecil, commanding Helena, gave the abandoned ship order quickly. The cruiser's structural integrity had failed. Communications, lighting, and internal control circuits were destroyed. The initial torpedo impacts had caused a chain reaction of flooding and mechanical failures as the ship began to list to port. Control rooms in the forward sections were already underwater. Fire mains ruptured. Electrical panels shorted with violent flashes. Within minutes, the bridge was relying on battery-powered lanterns, and voice tubes, long obsolete, were the only functioning means of internal communication. As the crew began evacuation procedures, St. Louis and Honolulu maintained contact with targets to the south. Fire control radars cycled through shifting echoes. Japanese destroyers were now dispersing in multiple directions. In the confusion, Nicholas and Radford, now ahead of the cruisers, received orders to close with the retreating contacts and launch torpedoes. Both ships swung to port and fired a spread. Several explosions were reported by observers, but poor visibility and overlapping fire control reports made attribution difficult. O'Bannon, positioned in the van ahead of the cruisers, briefly engaged an enemy contact attempting to maneuver around the formation. The Japanese destroyer was never positively identified, but it may have been Hatsuyuki, which was observed turning and firing around 218 before retreating behind smoke. The exchange was brief and inconclusive, with radar returns fading amid the confusion. Back at Helena, the situation had worsened. The forward section of the ship was already underwater. Hundreds of sailors had gone overboard. By 2:25, Helena broke apart and sank, the bow and stern rising clear before slipping beneath the waves. Radford turned back and began search and rescue operations under cover of darkness. Nicholas stood by with guns trained on the south in case of renewed attack. 739 survivors were eventually rescued by destroyers and whaleboats, some during the night, others throughout the following morning. Overhead, the skies remained empty. The Navy's air cover, based from Guadalcanal, had no night flying capability. The battle had taken place beyond the reach of supporting aircraft. If the Japanese had chosen to counterattack, they would have done so without fear of American planes. By 3 a.m., no further contacts remained on radar. The remaining Japanese ships had disengaged, some retreating south along the Kolombangara coast, others slipping west into the slot. The engagement had lasted less than an hour. Helena was gone. 168 of her crew were lost, but most survived thanks to immediate destroyer rescue efforts. In the days to come, PT boats and submarines would return to the area to retrieve survivors who had reached nearby reefs and islets. By the early hours of July 6th, the engagement had ended. The American ships regrouped and turned east, moving steadily back towards safer waters. St. Louis and Honolulu had taken only minor damage. The destroyers remained unscathed. The same could not be said for Helena. She had gone down quickly, breaking apart after multiple torpedo hits. Her loss was immediate and costly, one of the Navy's most experienced cruisers gone in minutes. The Japanese, though battered, had completed their mission. The troops of the 13th Infantry Regiment had made it ashore at Kolombangara. Vila remained in use. 2 destroyers had been lost, Nizuki and Nagatsuki, the last of which ran aground under air attack the following day. For Japan's night fighting force, these were not easy losses to replace. But they had once again delivered reinforcement under pressure. Neither side could claim a clear victory. The US Navy had inflicted serious damage and demonstrated the continued effectiveness of radar-directed gunnery. But the Japanese had achieved their objective. The result was a draw, strategically ambiguous, tactically costly. The waters around Kolombangara would see more fighting. The next night, action was not far off. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave a like. It really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.